You ever found yourself staring at the stars above you and feeling enraptured by the grand scale of the universe? Earth is a pretty big place, and that's not even including everything beyond our solar system. Yet despite all that, there's something that we know for sure about our planet. It's that it's bustling, it's active, it's alive. There's always something happening. There's always questions to be asked and answers to be found. From the ancient Chinese to the Greeks to the Babylonians, space has always been a fountain of endless questions. Even dating back before antiquity. Since the dawn of time. Since our reptilian ancestors decided to say, fuck it, we walk in that. We're creatures that are meant to defy the odds. We were meant to overcome challenges that were set before us. And what's a greater challenge than entering the sky above? The star-filled ocean. That vast abyss that we know as space. Our interest in the stars never left the atmosphere until October 4th, 1957. When the USSR managed to send the first man-made satellite, Sputnik, into space. Now let's backtrack a bit. Only a decade prior to this event, tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union began to grow. Now, if you were an American and you were looking at Sputnik, at the time there was some reason to be concerned here. Because first off, there's that real, genuine threat of complete nuclear fallout. But secondly, you were losing. You were falling behind. So, in response, thanks to the aid of some newfound friends,
Heavy load coming through.
January 31st, 1958, America managed to follow up with the Soviets' recent success with their own man-made satellite, the Explorer. So, now what? Both sides have managed to send their own satellites to space. What's the next logical step? A bigger satellite? Or is it even grander? More ambitious than ever before? What if we send a human being into space? And so, the race to send man into space had begun. Except, not quite. See, here's the thing with space. It's kind of big. And we kind of don't know everything about it. And with keeping all that in mind, it's not exactly the smartest idea to blindly send a man into the great abyss right away. So let's take a few steps back, real quick. Start small. Let's start with animals. And so with any big project, such as trying to send an entire human being into space, or to the moon, you gotta start small. Like real small. Like I'm talking questionably small. So on February 20th, 1947, America sends the first animals into space. The fruit fly. Launched via a V-2 rocket, they were able to successfully send them into space and to recover them alive. So the main reason behind this launch was not only to send the first animals into space, but they also wanted to see the effects of radiation and zero gravity on living organisms. There is a slight problem. The fact that a human being is way bigger than a fruit fly. So America had to come to a decision. And this decision was to reach a hand out to our primate cousins. And so the legend of Albert began. Let's start off. Albert and his contemporaries, they were a part of a series of tests involving primates entering space. And unfortunately, none of these launches went the way that America intended them to. And in retrospect, no matter how you look at it, this shit's fucked up. Albert the First. Albert the First was a rhesus macaque who flew up in a V-2 rocket. And he never did reach space, nor did he survive the trip. It said that he either suffocated to death during the flight, or he died before the launch even began. Jesus Christ. So things were pretty rough in the US. Nothing was really working as well as they intended it to. I mean, all those failed launches aren't going to help a whole lot when it comes to building confidence. And while our goals you could say were noble, I don't really think you can convey the same message to a monkey. Nevertheless, in the name of science, we persevered. And so, on August 31st, 1950, the US took a small step away from sending monkeys to their doom, and instead decided to take their chances up with a mouse. And guess what? Lo and behold, there's something very wrong with American parachutes, because the system failed and the poor thing perished. So in the meantime, while America was busy trying to figure out not to kill their passengers, we're going to take a look at the other side of the coin. We'll be looking at the Soviets. Now here's the thing with the Soviets. They thought primates would be far too unpredictable. So instead, they decided to reach out to humanity's oldest companion, man's best friend, the dog. July 22nd, 1951. The Soviets managed to send Tizgon and Dezik, 2 dogs, into space via an R-1 rocket. And so only 6 years later, on November 3rd, 1957, the Soviets would send the famous dog Laika into space. Laika boarded the Sputnik 2, being the first animal ever to orbit around the Earth. However, since the Soviets couldn't figure out a re-entry strategy in time, Laika unfortunately passed away while in space. In the words of a senior Soviet space scientist, their research and learning from the mission never did justify the death of the dog. We're back in America, and this time there's something different. After realizing the act of naming a monkey Albert is a fatal curse, on December 12, 1958, the US would send the next primate astronaut, Gordo, the Old Reliable. Now Gordo was a squirrel monkey, which made him different than his predecessors. This is because now not only is his anatomical makeup more similar to us, but so is his sensitivity to temperature changes, which could prove pretty useful considering space is pretty fucking cold. Furthermore, our boy Gordo was US Navy trained. Now what this means for a monkey, I'm really not too sure, but considering we got US Marines eating crowns, it meant Gordo was qualified. Equipped with a custom-made spacesuit, Gordo would enter space, only to have his parachute fail on re-entry and sink into the ocean. However, his sacrifice would not be in vain. You see, here's the thing. With the first half of Gordo's mission being a success, he experienced no detrimental side effects, which proved to the boys back home that they could send a human into space and not have to worry about an unexpected metamorphosis. Gordo's mission would further cement the foundation for which the soon-to-be monumental achievement of sending Abel and Baker into space. May 1959. And so the day came when America would finally send a monkey into space and manage to get them back home. This is the tale of Miss Baker and Miss Abel, 2 monkeys who were chosen amongst their peers to qualify for spaceflight. Donning custom-made spacesuits, Baker and Abel were placed inside specially made tubes, which would serve as their armchairs from which they would view the cosmos. It was designed to absorb both carbon dioxide and moisture, further eliminating any problems they may end up facing during their journey. Ready and armed, sitting aboard a Jupiter rocket, they were off. Reaching an altitude of 480 kilometers, experiencing an acceleration of 38 Gs, Miss Abel and Miss Baker flew amongst the stars for a total of 16 minutes. They got back home safe and sound, and ended up being hailed as American heroes. However, as any story with heroes goes, tragedy would strike. Only 4 days after arrival, during surgery, Abel experienced a fatal reaction to anesthesia, killing her in the process. Abel's memory was cemented via the Art Attacks Derby, where her now stuffed corpse resides in the museum for all the world to see. Abel was the yin, and Baker was the yang. Baker, on the other hand, man, she was living the high life. She ended up marrying a monkey named Big George and harbored her own kids. She lived a long and fulfilling life, outliving her husband and passing away in '84, 15 years after the Apollo 11 launch. Americans were finally managing to catch up. Until they didn't. The mad Soviets were at it again, and this time they managed to send the first animals into space who orbited the Earth and lived. The superstars of this flight were 2 dogs, Belka and Strelka. both of which were taxidermied for the world to see. With the success and newfound knowledge gained from the efforts of both Abel and Baker, America decided to step it up a notch by now recruiting a chimpanzee, Ham, who would serve as America's next primate pilot. Chimps, compared to every other monkey shot into space, were the closest primate relatives to us humans. Under the tutelage of American neuroscientist Joseph V. Brady, Ham was trained to perform basic tasks such as responding to changing lights and pulling levers. Ham would be rewarded with banana pellets upon successful completion of these tasks. Now, if he made a mistake, there would be an electric shock sent to his feet, a sign that he fucked up. Ham was a part of Project Mercury, the first American human spaceflight program. Ham was launched in a suborbital flight within a Mercury pod. Despite the intense situation, Ham managed to stay calm and recall his training. If a chimp can perform basic tasks in space, then a human should have no problem doing the same. As a bonus, Ham survived re-entering Earth's atmosphere. We managed to not lose him this time. And so, with a successful career in spaceflight behind him, Ham retired and spent his remaining years in zoos across the US. And it's thanks to Ham's success that Project Mercury now had a foundation, a launch pad, to which they could send the soon-to-be first American and second human ever into space, Alan Shepard. Yet once again, for the Americans to send Shepard into space, something monumental occurred. The history books would now have to write a new chapter in the human story. On April 12, 1961, Yuri Alexeyevich Gagarin, aboard the Vostok 1, was sent into space. The first human being to be sent into space, and the first human being to orbit the Earth. Despite all odds, we, as a species, with our own two hands, had finally managed to reach space. It was on May 6, 1961.
T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0.
American astronaut Alan Shepard would launch a suborbital flight aboard the Freedom 7 and become the second human ever to enter space. Despite not orbiting around the Earth, the fact that Shepard managed to reach space so soon after the Soviets showed that the pace of the space race was really starting to pick up. May 26, 1961. President John F. Kennedy hops on the national television and he announces one hell of a goal.
I therefore ask the Congress, above and beyond the increases I have earlier requested for space activities, to provide the funds which are needed to meet the following national goals. First, I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project
NASA, only being founded a year before this speech, along with the success of Freedom 7, established a significant confidence boost that the Americans were looking for. Kennedy's words would echo across the space race, serving as a frame in history to prove our ability to overcome the odds and achieve the impossible. Now hold up, Chief. You can't just rush into big goals. That's how you crash and burn. Instead, you gotta take a slow and methodical approach. You gotta have a plan. And this plan involves going back to the basics. I'm talking sticks and stones that built up the space race. We're talking monkeys. Let me introduce you to Enos. Enos was a chimp, sure, but he wasn't any ordinary chimp. Enos underwent extensive training because, unlike his predecessors, his task would be the most ambitious of them all. The grandiose task placed upon Enos' shoulders was to do 3 orbital trips around Earth. But as expected, things were not going to be that simple. Enos faced a lot of hurdles during his flight. So first off, Enos had a lever system set up for him, similar to what Ham had, with the objective of solving basic problems. Except something went to shit with the wiring, malfunctioning and shocking the poor chimp regardless of what he did. To make matters worse, his launch time got delayed. The fuel system started to malfunction, and his temperature regulating system started to malfunction, and Enos reached a steady boil of 100 degrees Fahrenheit. So the boys back home had to make a decision. I mean, it was pretty fucking obvious the chimp was gonna die. So there's a change in plans. Rather than 3 orbital trips, they opted for 2. And 2 trips he did, re-entering the atmosphere and crashing right into the Atlantic. Enos' trip was a relative success, which would soon be followed up by the achievement of a man called John Glenn.
Thank you, Thomas. Good Lord, ride all the ways. Godspeed, John Glenn. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3. Oh, that view is tremendous.
Thanks to the united effort of man and monkey, NASA sends John Glenn into space, the first American ever to orbit the Earth. Zond 1. A Soviet spacecraft with the intended goal of reaching Venus, ultimately missing its target and entering into heliocentric orbit. Zond 2. A Soviet spacecraft aimed at a flyby mission of Mars, failing just shortly after its launch due to its altitude control system failing. Zond 3. A spacecraft assigned a lunar flyby mission. It managed to capture high-quality photos at the time of the far side of the moon. However, communications were lost after it exceeded 153.5 million kilometers away from Earth. Zond 4. Another unmanned lunar flyby mission. While successfully managing a lunar flyby, its guidance system failed upon re-entering, forcing it to self-destruct. As you can see, the Zond program had its fair share of struggles and failures, until Zond 5. Zond 5 was considered the first major success of the Zond program, and with it came this photo. This is our home. This is Earth. What you see before you is one of the first high-quality photos of our planet in all its glory. Built upon the lessons of its predecessors, it became the first spacecraft at the time to complete a successful circumlunar voyage, carrying with it live animals as its passengers. Initially planned with the idea of carrying human cosmonauts to the moon, it's reasonable to believe they decided to change their decision to animals in order to accommodate for the miscalculations of past projects. Aboard Zond 5 were 2 Russian tortoises, along with a variety of organic life forms. Now, considering this was the first time they sent anything organic this far into space, they were naturally curious what the hell cosmic radiation would end up doing. I mean, these turtles were going to experience 700 times the amount of cosmic radiation you'd experience on Earth in deep space. Deep space being the area of space beyond planets, without the protection of a nearby planet's atmosphere. It really begs the question, what the hell could happen? On September 14, 1968, Zond 5 was launched. After a successful circumlunar voyage, it was time for re-entry. Now, reading up on this, it said that the re-entry into Earth's atmosphere would have been lethal to humans. Yet these Russian tortoises are just built different. And so, September 21st, 1968, Zond 5 re-entered Earth's atmosphere and landed right into the Indian Ocean, recovered by nearby Soviet ships. Surprisingly enough, the tortoises were not mutants, and the organic payload, despite experiencing some mild weight loss which was not due to cosmic radiation, was said to have been fine. So once again, the Soviets were in the lead, begging the question, what did the Americans have in mind? So while rumors flew around that the Soviets were just months away from sending a man to the moon, America was hard at work. They were getting closer and closer to turning Kennedy's words into a reality. The contract formed between man and monkey was not yet forgotten, and with just a few weeks prior to the iconic Apollo 11 launch came a smaller, forgotten astronaut, a pigtail macaque named Bonnie. Bonnie, by his lonesome, was on track to fly a 30-day orbiting mission in space with the intention of testing human endurance. The world was rooting for Bonnie, excited to see him succeed, but more importantly, from NASA's point of view, they wanted to learn the side effects of extended organic life in space. And so he was off. But only 8 days into his 30-day orbit, something wasn't right. NASA themselves didn't know why, but 8 days into his 30-day orbit, Bonnie had just given up. Bonnie stopped responding to the lever task given to him. Was it something he saw? Was he, a monkey, confronted with his own fleeting existence in relation to the stars above, losing his grip on reality? Perhaps he was awestruck by the world above, or perhaps he fell into a deep pit of despair, questioning his own existence. Jokes aside, Bonnie's condition began to decline, causing NASA to pull the plug on the operation and get Bonnie home. Despite a successful recovery, Bonnie unfortunately passed the day after his return home. While Bonnie's death caused an outrage, it would soon be shadowed by the conclusion of our story, an achievement only made possible from the collective sacrifices of heroes like Bonnie. The Apollo 11 launch.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth. No single space project in this period.
In the very same decade this speech took place, Kennedy's words would materialize and become a reality. It was finally happening. Everything that took place during the space race, all the sacrifices made by everyone involved, would culminate into this major event.
T-minus 1 minute, 35 seconds on the Apollo mission, the flight to land of the first men on the moon.
On July 16, 1969, broadcasted from America, the world would witness history in the making.
Sequence starts. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff.
We had finally sent the first man to the moon. Apollo 11 would launch, and carrying within it would be Commander Neil Armstrong, Command Module Pilot Michael Collins, and Lunar Pilot Edwin Buzz Aldrin. With a nerve-wracking launch countdown, they would be off. 4 days after the initial launch on July 20th, 1969, the voice of Neil Armstrong would echo across an estimated 650 million watchers worldwide. They had landed on the moon. Our reach would extend beyond the sky, beyond the stars. We had finally done it. The famous words that would soon be cemented forever into history would be heard.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for man.